Okay, hello and welcome to this first session of R&D Unplugged, which is a seminar by the Unité de Recherche Learning Transitions of the FBI and CY. We're very happy about this series of seminars because it's a way for us to communicate about research, focusing on simplicity, accessibility, and so you don't need to be an expert to listen to our speakers. Our first speaker today is Pedro Ramaciotti Morales on social media, algorithms, and politics, and he will speak about 25 minutes, after which he will take questions. Pedro, take it away.
Thanks. So thanks for the presentation and for the invitation for presenting some of the work we're doing, but mostly trying to convey the context on which we're working. So this is a presentation, as Hashab said, about social media, algorithms, and politics. This already rings a lot of evocations, but I want to focus on trying to provide a non-scientific public kind of exposition, but extracting broad lessons from research and talking about what it means in terms of challenges to policy. I'm a CNRS researcher, by the way. I'm also affiliated with Sciences Po, and I have an affiliation at the Learning Planet Institute where I'm running a project that it's related to the question of the algorithms, so fundamental questions about how algorithms work in this kind of environment. So when we talk about these three big words, right, already we have a lot of evocations, and I don't want to spend too much time trying to unfold them all, but I want to give a first structure of what people call into mind when they hear this. So there's a dimension of mental health, cognitive ability. So is this something that is harming mental health, psychological consequences? And there are a lot of very prominent voices raising concerns on this. Then there's a different kind of lane of consequences of this conjunction of social media and algorithms because it rewires a lot of the connections we unfold in our lives daily. So it naturally has a lot of consequences also in economics and economics dynamics. But the ones I would like to talk about today are related to politics. So we have all seen, of course, in the media in the last couple of decades, things like this. Social media polarizes and radicalizes. This or that platform is radicalizing people. And I want to unfold this, trying to provide a broad landscape of what the narrative is, then what research says about this, and then what it means in terms of policy. This, of course, is dramatically epitomized, and it wouldn't be a presentation if I hadn't put a Donald Trump tweet here. But these are the ones leading to the storming of the Capitol, emboldening supporters with this theory of voter fraud that unfolded so dramatically. This is what's on everyone's retina when talking about this. This, of course, does not exist in the void, and one of the important contexts in which people think about these things is this thing of democratic backsliding. So the idea that we are embarked in a tendency of degradation of the quality of our democracies or the reach of our democracies in the world. So there are a lot of ways of measuring it and making sense of this multifaceted phenomenon. Different people would choose to show you different metrics of evolution of the quality of democracy within that or that country. I'm choosing to show this other one in which researchers have tried to keep track of which countries, how many of them are embarked in a trajectory of autocratization. And what you see here is that these are the ones in the blue, types of the autocratization. And the ones in the curves in the blue have been growing since the end of the Soviet Union, more or less, right? And in parallel with the unfolding of the massification of social platforms in society. So this is what people have in mind. There might be a problem, and this problem might be of consequence, might be intertwined with this trend. So now that we kind of have established what we are discussing here, let me try to recap and try to provide a sense of visibility at a glance. What is the narrative that is out there? What is that I think that most people know about this? So I think that looking back at this issue, a lot of people would point different points in time, and this is a fairly complex exercise. But I think that one of the earliest warnings that people remember, and that certainly had a lot of impact, is at the turn of the century, the publications by Kasustan, right? This book called Republic, #Republic. And in here, there were a lot of ideas, but there's one that I think that encapsulates a lot of what's in the debate in a way that neatly presents already the minimal conceptual tools needed to put a lot of order in public debate outside academia too. So this is a quote that is often cited. So if the public is Balkanized, so remember this is less than 10 years after the Balkan War. So if the public is Balkanized, different groups, each consistent of like-minded individuals, will be driven increasingly apart. So in here, there are already the elements. There's the question of groups. So maybe society would be assembled into groups in these online ecosystems. And this group will be so homogeneous that there would be some kind of dynamic that the stances that these people would have when we're talking about politics, these stances are stances towards political issues, immigration, redistribution, etc., would be distancing more and more. So this is polarization in this sense. So there's a notion of groups and polarization and a negative kind of dynamics, negative in the sense of the social impact they brought in. So at the time, there were also the appearance of the first empirical studies that tried to tackle this question, because it was also a time in which we were seeing the emergence of a lot of data being produced on behavioral data being produced online. So this is a study that I I choose to show because I think that it also captures a moment in which people start representing these ideas in the public in a different way. So this is a study in which Lada Adamik and Nathalie Glantz, they look at the political landscape of blogs in the United States that were very popular in the period leading to the 2004 election. And they, through a protocol, they identified a group of blogs that they thought they were important, influential. Then they set out to label each one according to whether they were a Democrat-leaning or Republican-leaning, and then to crawl how blogs pointed to one another, right? So what does it mean? That the author of the blog would say, this is my opinion, go read also the opinion of this other person, and a hyperlink. So with a crawl, they reestablished the connections of hyperlink between these blogs. And this is what they got. So red dots are Republican blogs, blue dots are Democratic-leaning blogs, and the edges here, the links are whenever a blog points to another. And so the idea of this Balkanization hypothesis of society is that maybe it is the case that the red blobs are more densely connected together than the blue dots, right? And there are few connections among them. And if you believe the Balkanization hypothesis, this is detrimental in the sense that it would necessarily lead to further polarization between these two groups. By the way, a short detour, you should not believe in network visualizations unless you're given more context, right? Because you can change a node from one place to another. It's still the same network. It's not that we see the two clustered in space differently, that it's conveying information. And of course, the researchers included a lot of metrics that show quantitative measures of connection and disconnection between these two groups. So this encapsulates visually for a generation the concept of Balkanization into groups in this term called echo chambers in the public domain. This is the landmark figure of what an echo chamber looks like. And this has been remembered for a couple of decades now. So from this start, this early warning, these first results, we've seen an unfolding of this topic in the public domain, in the public debate, but also in popular culture. And I want to give a very quick overview of what I think this narrative looked in the mind of the public. So it is not only that people decide how to establish these connections that might lead to balkanized groups, it is also maybe that algorithms are fostering this tendency if it exists, right? So this book was very influential at the time, 2011, in which the proposition was that platforms, because the things you're being presented with are curated by algorithms, it is algorithms that might be fostering this enclosement into groups, and this book is presented as a warning sign, right? So this further has been further developed in other artifacts in popular culture. For example, this kind of documentary that I think many people have seen, in which the idea that it is also that it is because these mechanisms are so intertwined with the economic logic of these platforms, that it might be even further down the problem that it is a necessity of the economic systems of this platform that the algorithms have an interest in splitting people more and more into groups, right? So this is some idea that it also exists outside, and even more so in the more academic circles, this marks a tendency between positivism and negativism, in the sense that a lot of hopes that have been nourished about the positive impact of internet in society, democratization of voice, instantaneous mobilization, the freedom of information, came to take a turn that it's often epitomized with this book. And beyond the economic entanglement with this problematic phenomenon, was also proposed later that political actors themselves would be involved in taking profit of this personalization and balkanization by crafting messages to different groups of voters, to which they could cater different messages and profit from this balkanization in political gains, right? And so after the 2016 events and all through the Trump years, we've seen a défilé, I'm forgetting my words in English, of tech people explaining to the Senate what is that these platforms are doing to prevent all this. And this all yields, by the end of this arc, like this narrative that I think it's the one that exists out there, in responses, right? So in the European Union, it's the GDPR regulation for the protection of private data, and more recently, the Digital Service Act, which is a regulation that intends to regulate political phenomena or other phenomena such as illegal content, for example, in platforms. So this, I would say, is the narrative arc that occupies most of the space that this theme has out there in the public, in the press, for example. So in view of that, what I would like to propose is, again, a quick overview about what has been going on in research, what people looking at empirical results and quantitative measures are saying about this. And for this, I would like to support what I'm going to say with this excellent work by colleagues in Germany, in which they did a systematic survey of all media studies that have been put out there. So the first thing to notice here on the right, and this is, by the way, not in their paper, it's just an addition that I put here, is the volume of articles being produced addressing this topic. So I see here echo chambers, so this idea of fragmentation of communities, filter bubble, the degree to which algorithms might be fostering this situation, and then interest in polarization. So you see a sequence throughout the years in these last 2 decades of a lot of research attention given to these kind of topics. And then what I think is very interesting about this survey is that it neatly portrays the heterogeneity in this mass of research. So in the public, it might seem that there's an algorithm, a social media, and we do science on them and extract results. And through this research, I think it's very direct to see the heterogeneity. If we organize, for example, these studies into the countries in which they're being conducted, because when you do this, you need to select a population for your study, Twitter user from this country, Facebook users from that other. So you see that there's a very unequal repartition of studies that have granted attention to different political spheres in the world. So the United States accumulates most of the studies, meaning that what the public reads, but also what the policymaker reads in the reports that are intended to inform policy, it's a lot of things that are best suited for the specific political and social setting of those countries. So this is the first takeaway, I think. The heterogeneity and the reach and coverage that we have managed to produce with this research, it's sometimes failing. For example, you see a continent that it's not been explored that much in that respect. Even Europe has not extensively been explored, even though transforming itself into a very relevant actor. So then, this is geographically the kind of heterogeneity the survey highlights. But then if we look at how these studies are organized into the specific themes they are interested in, we see an arrangement of this sort. So in the lines on the left, you see the specific phenomena they're trying to address in their study. And on the bottom, you see different scopes, so for example, different platforms. And you see that a lot of research has been put on participation, polarization, and populism, a lot less on hate speech, and so on. And a lot of research has been put on Twitter, on Facebook, some on YouTube, a lot less on others. For example, TikTok and many others that are also taking an important fraction of the attention of the public and that are entangled in some way with the political dynamics in a country. So this heterogeneous picture already highlights this problem of what I often call substantialism. So people tend to think that there's an algorithm, the social media thing, that has an effect or doesn't, where in reality we're dealing with countries, populations, platforms, phenomena, and we're spreading the research effort on all of this and producing observational studies that are often quite limited in scope and very difficult to generalize. So if we accept this heterogeneity and we try to do the best to answer the question of balkanization, right? So is there balkanization? Is this leading to polarization or not? If we try to look at this, extracting what's been published here, we look first at the question of diversity, which is to what degree people are exposed to diverse content. So to what degree this fragmentation exists or not. Here in red or orange are arranged the articles that propose that this social media is actually limiting the exposure to diverse content. So red and blues are reading less of each other, for example. In green, what you see is the opposite kind of result, that social media fosters situations in which people are more exposed to diverse content than they would otherwise be. This otherwise encapsulates a lot of caveats, right? So what is a world without social media? But the picture is at best mixed, right? So there's no clear-cut evidence to say you could very difficultly go out to a policymaker and say, listen, there's an acute degree of balkanization. It's very nuanced and it's very heterogeneous what's underneath in terms of as I mentioned, the political settings, countries, population, and platforms. So if we look now at what the consequences have been in this body of work relating to polarization, the results are also mixed, but less so. So it would seem that it is more often the case than not that engaging in these platforms and consuming information in these platforms can foster polarization in the sense that we mentioned before, meaning that you have a stance, other people have a stance, and it would seem that stances are growing further apart. Stances, for example, that would be typically measured in some scales. How do you feel about redistribution? How do you feel about abortion? How do you feel about gun rights in the United States, etc., and so on? So this is a very complex picture already. It seems a lot less monolithic than what it is often presented in the media, right? So I think that most of the things that contribute to the complexity of this picture is something that it's often been put forward as a frontier matter in the field, which is the fact that a lot of these questions were first cast as a matter of exposure. So can we track who is seeing what? And is it because they followed someone or not, or they subscribe to a channel or not, or because the algorithm is proposing different things? Whereas now more and more the question is, how is the system of entanglement between exposure and political attitudes working? So of course, the things that you look online, be them because you select them or the algorithm proposed them to you, is affecting your political attitudes, your individual political attitudes, but also your individual political attitudes are consequences of how you perceive the political attitudes of others. So there's a complex system there of opinions. And these individual and collective attitudes are also influencing how the algorithms are choosing to propose you things. So this complex entanglements is what now in the attention of a lot of people trying to push this knowledge further. And let me try to illustrate these difficulties with one recent result. So in this recent result, people were questioning this entanglement. So is it really that if we show people content only from their community that they are going to grow further apart from the other community? Well, they really set out to test this idea following this research design. So they went on Twitter on the United States and took interest in two types of population. So Republican-leaning individuals, Democratic-leaning individuals. And for each one, they took a control group, which they were not going to modify the contents they were going to see, but they selected a treatment group in which they paid people to follow a bot that would feed them specifically content from the other side of the aisle. So for Republican-leaning individuals, the treatment group received from the bot content that has been produced or has been labeled as Democratic-leaning. And on the other side, Democratic-leaning individuals that were in the treatment group were paid to follow a bot that would feed them conservative content. And they set out to measure how this affects polarization, and they did it in the following way. So for Democrats and Republicans, they administered a survey at the beginning of the experiments and then at the end of the experiment. So here you see the results on the center. Hopefully it's seen with enough resolution afterwards. So you see here in the center for Democrats and on the right for Republicans. And you see different levels of engagement with the bot. So at the bottom are the ones that really follow the opposite that was feeding them diverse content. And the result is kind of surprising in the sense that these people that follow this bot, that were breaking this group, that were breaking balkanization, really grew further apart in a way that is a counterexample to the balkanization hypothesis. What does this mean? It's hard to tell in the heterogeneity of aspects that we are considering, but at least there is a result that forbids us to generalize in saying that it is because that people are clustered in groups and receiving very low diversity of content that they might grow polarized. We cannot say that this is the generality of the problem. So this is kind of shocking for a lot of different people in different communities, and something troubling because it's hard to say where it points to in terms of what it needs to be done. So if you're a policymaker, what do you do with this? So let me talk now about additional challenges that are very important in understanding why this is so difficult. So the results I presented, they all come from an ontology, right? So a setting that is best suited to the United States. And the United States is a two-party system, and that displays high alignment of issues among the population, meaning that if you have one stance on abortion, you probably know that person stands on gun control and immigration, right? So a lot of issues are very correlated. So it turns out that a single dimension of ideology of these very aligned issues is very useful for proposing research design, evaluating results. So this is a liberal conservative scale. But this is, of course, not the case around the world. And in another important actor in the European Union, this is shown to not be the case. So this is one of my own studies in which we try to infer the positions of large populations of Twitter users on France, and found at least two irreducible dimensions. So this means that also the question of representing what an opinion is needs to be taken into multidimensional light. So here the two dimensions that turn out to be irreducible were ones aligned with left-right. So in the x-axis, there's a lot of alignment with immigration, nationalism, attitude towards Islam, redistribution. And on the y-axis it's an alignment of attitudes towards elite, trusted institutions, attitudes towards European Union, and also questions related to globalization, so internalization of economy, internalization of frameworks, of legal frameworks, for example. And you see that, yeah, the population is spread in a way that it's not reducible, so there's no line in this two-dimensional space. But also you look at the parties, so the parties here are shown with different colors, and the little crosses are members of parliament. So they occupy themselves, so the political elites also occupy themselves a space that is irreducible to a single dimension, raising more challenges to the kind of research designs that we should put forward in thinking these questions. This is, by the way, something that has been tested all across Europe, so there are different ways of testing it. This is one result that I like to show because it's already growing old. It's from 2012, but it's one of the most complete, the ones that have most coverage in Europe, and they did it with survey research. So they tried to understand how many dimensions would be needed to account for the diversity of opinion that people express on different issues. And the colors here represent some dimensionality index that they propose. So darker colors mean that it's more and more possible to represent with just one dimension. So for example, the case of the UK, it's very known for the public. So it's not a two-party system, but kind of a resembles one. It's also the case of Poland and Sweden. France is somewhere in the middle in this spectrum. So two dimensions seem more or less appropriate. Countries such as Slovenia and Finland would need more, 3 or more. So this is an additional complexity that we, as a country that has set a continent that has set itself as an important actor in policy, is facing when trying to come out with results that would be informative enough of the diversity that we have inside Europe. So this is, by the way, something that is at the focus of the efforts that on one of the projects I launched in 2020, which is the European Polarization Observatory, which is a project about building political data sets and political data around online populations around Europe in a way that it's comparable. And it's a project that we are developing with the Sciences Po, Central European University, and University of Bocconi University in Milan. So to sum up the kind of difficulties that the kind of research we are able to do now are facing when addressing this, I kind of would like to structure along these 4, just for the purpose of this presentation. I don't think anyone else would propose the same one, but I think it's useful for looking back on the narrative we just saw. So scientific challenges, data challenges, economic challenges, and scientific career challenges. So scientific challenges are already ripe to be enunciated from what we just saw, right? So the first problem is that it all hinges on political opinions. If you want to measure if something has an effect on polarization, you need to measure political opinions, and the traditional way of doing it is by surveys. Surveys are expensive, and you cannot run a lot of surveys frequently in time. And also, it's very hard to connect survey respondents with data traces that you can observe. So it's hard to, what they did in this experiment in the United States that I show, it's very hard to achieve. It's very limited what you can do in a more ecological kind of research design that you would like to do. And then we really lack models for political attitudes and behavior. Of course, there's a century of results in political psychology, social psychology, cognitive sciences, and there are a lot of good results in that respect. But we are not in a position in which we have a model that would allow us to make good enough generalizations of the data, conclusions of the data that we're seeing, that would anticipate, for example, the kind of results we did in the previous study. To say it in a kind of a blunt and unjust way, but I think that might speak to a certain type of audience. We are in a Galilean age of opinion dynamics and not in a Newtonian age of opinion dynamics. So then there's a lot of very concrete challenges. So the first one is data challenge. So to do this kind of study, you need the data from the platforms. And these come in two flavors. So the public data, the data that anyone can just open the platform and see who retweeted what, who wrote what. These data, up until recently, we were under the impression that we have very good access, but it was very limited. So the amount of things that were going on in Europe that were relevant and we were able to capture and analyze was minimal. And now that the platforms have chosen to close even further, the situation is dire. So this data is, in theory, obtainable, but it would cost tens of thousands of euros per month to do a significant countrywide or European-wide kind of analysis. So there's a lot of restriction, and there are not many teams in the world. There are virtually very, very few, counted maybe in a hand, that are able to do countrywide full experiments and analysis. And then the more troublesome aspect is the private data. So the data that you cannot have, only people working inside platforms can have, which is the most important one, the exposure data. So we could see before who retweeted what, but we could not see who saw what when scrolling. And this is crucial. And this has never been available. And all the studies that we've seen that include this are from people working inside platforms, designing the way in which they want to be open with the scientific world. There are plans for getting this data. For example, the DSA has provisions for us researchers accessing this data, but this is proving to be already problematic because, of course, it comes in the face of trade secrets, proportionality of request, and a lot of legal difficulties that are natural in this kind of settings and that we're just beginning to explore. Then there's an economy of science kind of problem, right? So we researchers have our positions, but then in order for us to conduct work, we need the projects, and the projects normally fund up to a couple $100,000 euros per year that can be amassed in a single lab that can design to then do something of consequences. And these agencies providing this, and this, by the way, is great. So any researcher having this would be very happy, right? So this is the best case scenario. But the agencies that are granting these funds are evaluating these projects by scientists that would want to see a large fragment of this budget allocated to young researchers, so paying postdocs and PhDs. So it's incredibly difficult to say we are going to build in Europe a system in which we're going to create infrastructure, have the engineers, have the analysis of power analysis, and we're going to crunch this problem. The rules of the game do not allow for this thing to emerge. And then there's the question of scientific career. So why would scientists would even want to do this in the first place, right? So the landmark artifact of a scientific career is the article. And in the article, you're pushed to say, I had this limited thing, I had these results, this is my reasonable push to what generalizability would be. They are not pushed to, they are not rewarded to, they are not aligned with the building of infrastructures and long-term projects that would allow us to have an improved strategic position in this key issue, which is the entanglement between digital technologies and politics. This is, by the way, the opinion of a lot of people in research community, and this is one of the most vocal and and respected voices in that regard. And this is, by the way, an opinion piece in Nature from a couple of years back saying, just drastically, social media reform is flying blind, to highlight the degree to which we don't know exactly what's going on social media. And we've been under the impression that we did with the crumbs we've been given. We're still doing great research, don't get me wrong. So there's a lot of brilliant people. So we have great funding ecosystem, a lot of brilliant people, but the problem is not being solved. So just to recap with what we've said. So I think that the key concepts to keep in mind when structuring this is the question of exposure, that it's separate to the question of attitude. So exposure is, are we fragmented into groups? Is the algorithm showing me this or showing me that? But then there's a question of attitude. So where people stand on political issues. These are the two things that are at play here. So as I said, and as Chris Bale said, so the state of what's going on between social media and politics is generally unknown. We also lack sufficient theories of opinion dynamics. This is the Galilean Newtonian thing, in which, of course, we recognize the work of a lot of brilliant people and great advances for 100 years now on this, but still we're not in a position in which we have a general theory of what would happen with people's opinion if we did this or that. If Mark Zuckerberg and Putin got together and gave you endless funding, you still wouldn't know what to do other than hunches and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. For this population, it would seem to work. It's difficult to have an encompassing theory that would support your effort, right? Even in idealistic conditions. So this points to a kind of a mismatch. This is what I call the substantialist kind of danger in research. So we read a lot of papers that are forced to generalize because this is how you publish. So, but remember that behind this, there's a lot of heterogeneity. And the key aspect is lack of data. Without lack of data, we're not going to get too much ahead. So if I might, my peace of mind about this is how to move forward. I think data, a lot of people are doing a lot of efforts because everyone's aware of this problem. But I think that in the end, what's going to work, it's to deepen the transformation of the relation between the states that yield the power, for example, of regulation and platforms. This is because it's, of course, in the interest of states, but I think that it's in the interest of platforms too, to keep developing a viable economic model in relation with the states. And this is something that hopefully we'll see unfolding in a couple of years ahead. Institutions need to transform also the logic of how public and private money comes to fund this initiative. The public has, of course, the interest of doing it, and there are signs that they're doing it, but I think that more clearly needs to be set in the rules of grants, for example, that this is an objective worth be valued in the review that would give you finally the grant, right? So I'm proposing to hire PhDs, keep doing science, but also building a thing that would need a long-term effect, a long-term effort. And I think that private has a lot at stake here too. Companies that rely on this digital economy, companies that rely more indirectly, I know, on the stability of the political system and the strategic autonomy of different countries have a lot of stake here too. And I don't see as a stretch that they will be interested in participating in the construction of this ecosystem that could in turn have very external positive consequences in terms of employment, technology. And then in terms of how to align people, it is not the case completely, even though there have also been efforts that scientific careers are valued in terms of the impact they produce in regulation and policy. They're still mainly evaluated on the number of and the visibility of the articles they publish. This is something that for sure would improve this situation. So this is where I would like to stop to hopefully have a discussion of some of these ideas. Thank you.
Questions? Anybody?
Otherwise, I start. Thanks for the great presentation. I have a question. You showed the study where the different groups were treated with a chatbot from the other one, which is actually shocking because it was also what I thought. If we confront people with diverse information, they would shift their attitude, so the positions. Do you have or are there recommendations in literature how we could tackle that problem?
I don't think so, but there's a lot of thinking about what's going on there. So this article was published from a specific community within social media studies. So the people doing this study come from sociology. And what they're interested in, the ideas that inspired the work is to what degree the kind of positions you take are instruments that you wield to defend your identity. So it would seem natural that a lot of your political opinions is just something that you put out there, or that you host yourself, that does not have an utilitarian political value, saying it's going to save you taxes. But it also has a value in the sense that it will allow you to belong to a community, to stand legitimately within one community. And when you see that construction, that identity that you have done for yourself, put it into question because there is information that is contrary to that, from that perspective, it was expected that it would summon forces responding negatively to diversity. So this is the thinking. Then the question is, are there ideas to limit that? I don't know, because it would mean you would still want to push forward the further diversification of content, but resisting this negative. I don't think anyone has a compelling global theory leading to action on that.
Okay.
I would love to follow up on this because I was surprised and not surprised because I would have loved to see it differently, but my guts unfortunately says otherwise because it is very well known that you don't convince someone that is on the other side. If you start by providing arguments, it just retracts on his own arguments. It just doesn't work. On climate change, that's been studied a lot, and and this confirmation bias in particular is very important. So when you're discussing with someone that doesn't agree with you, just the fact that proposing argument just doesn't work. It reinforces the other side. So that's what we see. That's my interpretation of it. And so I wonder how the experiment has been done. That is, the people that are in the samples, are they representative of the heterogeneity of one side, let's say? So that is coming from the people that won't change whatsoever to the ones that just don't know what they're here by, and so in the whole thing. And so what is the proportion of people that may want to discuss or not? So that's question one. Question two is that only arguments like this is the blog post of someone and that's only analytical, let's say, and because I would expect that you might want to that change may occur if you can establish some emotional link to people, if there is a true conversation. So is that only presenting arguments like, say, articles, or is there engagement and conversation?
Yeah, so I don't know the details exactly. I don't remember the details, the exact details of the study, but it raises the question of what is it to select a population that is representative of some group, right? I'm guessing, or if my memory doesn't trick me, I'm inclined to think that what they did is to rely only on variables that would speak to their position in these liberal conservative scales. They may have control for all the variables, but I think that it's a tricky question in itself. So what are the other variables that would kind of have a different effect on that? I don't think that that is something that it's very easy to tackle. And on the second one, this I know for a fact that what they were doing is relying on people's position on liberal conservative scales. They were able to label some of the contents as being more liberal or more conservative, and this is something that it's at the heart of a lot of research designs put forward recently in the United States. For example, the Meta paper that came out last year, all the Facebook papers that were published in 2015 had more or less the same thinking behind it, and it's presenting you the news content as you would see it published in a post,
As if you were on the other side.
without additional cues. So it's not preceded by someone saying, "Go to hell, you Democrat." This is the one. This is not the case, at least in these studies. But of course, one of the complexities of the thing is that the diversity of cues that play a role in the way that you digest. So this is what makes also platforms so different from one another. So Twitter, it's a completely different study from Facebook and yet from YouTube. Also in the degree of how you evaluate this as a person. Is this a person show me something? Is this a channel show me something? This is an institutional account, or this is an account of a person, but that I see from the outside that it benefit from a lot of support from other ones. So this is a very complex setting in this regard. Yeah.
Other questions?
Do we know how much the social media is responsible for polarization as with other issues like economic issues, global political issues? Because everybody seems to think that social media is important in polarization, but do we have proof of that?
Yes and no. So it is impossible to put yourself today in a position in which you have access to a counterfactual, which is a society without social media. So there's no way of knowing. Then there are experiments like this, which are great. A lot of efforts, a lot of brilliance in building them, but are limited, right? But they already show you like different causal dynamics. So it's also very reasonable to think that part of the polarization we're seeing today must be because people are engaging in this kind of dynamics. But if you look at historical studies going back to periods far before social media, there was polarization, and this polarization had a lot of dynamics too. For example, one of the traditional ways of measuring polarization before the digitalization of information was looking at the divergence of ideological position of members of parliaments in countries. So in the United States, it worked very neatly because you have only two groups, so you can trace in a liberal conservative scale, so how are these two groups moving further apart or not? And you can see throughout the years in the 20th century, the events that collapse polarizations. For example, World War II is a period in which you see typically all these curves collapse into very low polarization because there's a lot of cohesion. Through the 70s, a lot of polarization between these two groups. So polarization is also an effect of all the causes that are outside the digital transformation of politics.
You say that global crisis can reduce polarization?
I don't know, but at least World War II did that for the United States.
And Maidan issue did that for Ukraine in 2014. Because all the country united against the president that not voted for EU. But when you have something which is really dire, then you're not in front for the Conseil de la Refondation. That's exactly what happened in 45.
That's interesting.
In the resistance.
When you link it to like climate crisis, because so far it seems to be polarizing people, but maybe at some point when the crisis becomes dire or more visible, it might have the opposite effect.
That's a hope, but it has not been working so well.
There's social media is about the attention, grasping people's attention. So I wonder how faithful it is to people's real opinions in the real world, because on social media people tend to bark, advise, to fight, and you mentioned the sense of belonging to a community as well. Is that bias taken into account between the gap between the actual political position, and on social media, which might be a bit more extreme.
Yeah. So people try to take this into account, but it's very complicated because the construct of someone's political position is very reliant on a lot of different things, and it's essentially unobservable. So you infer that from different, and when you try to do it, when you try to access the true political position, a traditional way has been survey by survey. Survey itself suffers from a lot of problems too. So people, there's social likability in responding. There's a strategic thinking in responding and yielding finally untruthful to some degree answers. That way, there's behavioral data, but behavioral data suffers from what you're saying. So are people online the same that they are outside? But what I think it's, so of course it's a problem, but I think that one of the things that can be said from research is that if you kind of bluntly separate information consumers and information providers within these ecosystems, so influencers, for example, in the public, there's a lot of anecdotal inference results showing that people that are on the information providing side are just catering whatever representation of political position that is needed to maximize the business they're conducting. So when you talk with influencers, when you do ethnography about what is this that's going on with this influencer that it's putting out a lot of extremist content, you often see some of this very, well, less extreme, right?
Thanks. Any other questions? We still have a couple of minutes.
I would have another question. You said that there's a lack of models for attitudes and behavior. And then is there really like a start of research, because you have a lot of models, for example, for other kind of behaviors, for environmental behavior, or so on. So could that be something which help explaining the political behavior, because there are already a bunch of influencing factors that are analyzed? Could that be adapted? Is there really something going on, or are there already factors examined who could play an important role?
Yeah, so this is when I said it, I tried to put a lot of caveats around it. So there's of course a lot of models, and for decades people have been proposing models from all sorts of disciplines, communities, scientific communities, and people working in opinion dynamics will tell you that they've been putting forward very explicit, like the equations that govern different systems. The problem is that a lot of these assumptions built into the system break in different circumstances. For example, this one I showed breaks a couple of models, and there are disprovers that you can choose from in the heterogeneity of things that kind of disprove different models. But also it's very difficult to move towards a science of models when you don't have the data. And we don't have the data. Very, very few people have the data. So there are a lot of propositions of how things, so this is how it works in the opinion dynamic community. You say, I'm thinking this is a good model. I'm running a simulation and see if it's to some degree it matches reality. I have very sparse data on reality. This is a state more or less of that part of the field in the question of the models.
You mentioned that the new European regulation will force the platform to give away more data.
Yeah, so we've tried. So for example, I have a project with the law school at Sciences Po, in which we are writing the documents to ask for the data, right? So we've explored, and we're in contact with the French regulator and the German regulator, and we are getting experience for a lot of people that have seen their data requests denied for different reasons, and we've explored all the ramifications and tree of positions of things that we can ask for, reading at the document with lawyers, right? And it seems very adversarial, so it's not going to be easy. They're going to push on every little reason that they have to deny it. It will come hopefully someday, but it's a battle. It's not that we have the DSA and then we have the data.
I suggest that we close this session, and thank very much, Pedro, once again. Thank you, Pedro.
Thanks for the invitation.